It was early morning in the city courthouse. The air was cool, and a soft mist covered the ground. People in uniforms rushed around, carrying files and talking in low voices. Among them walked Officer Sarah Collins, a woman known for her sharp attitude and cold eyes. Sarah was proud of her uniform. She had worked hard to earn it, and she believed it gave her power over others. Some called her strict. Others quietly whispered arrogant. But Sarah didn't care what anyone said. To her, respect was something people owed her. It's not something she had to earn. As she reached the main gate, she noticed a black man walking toward the courthouse. He was tall, dressed neatly in a black suit, holding a small briefcase. His walk was calm, confident, and peaceful. But to Sarah, he looked suspicious, too calm, too sure of himself. She stepped in front of him. "Stop right there," she ordered. The man stopped and looked at her with gentle eyes. "Good morning, officer," he said kindly. Sarah frowned. "Where do you think you're going?" He smiled slightly. "Inside. I have a session today." But Sarah wasn't listening. She scanned him from head to toe, trying to find a reason to doubt him. "Session. Are you a lawyer?" she asked, her tone sharp. "Something like that," he replied softly. Sarah crossed her arms. "Then where's your ID badge? You can't just walk in here looking like that. Show me your pass." The man reached into his briefcase slowly, but Sarah's hand moved toward her holster. "Don't even think about it," she snapped. He paused, sighing quietly. "Ma'am, I'm just trying to get to my courtroom." Sarah's voice grew colder. "Listen, sir, you can't talk to me like that." "Do you know who I am?" He nodded politely. "Do you know who I am?" Her temper flared. "I don't need to. Step back and wait until I say so." A few people nearby stopped to watch. The scene was uncomfortable. Some looked away. The man's face remained calm. He looked into her eyes and said, "You shouldn't talk to people like that, officer." Sarah laughed mockingly. "Oh, really? And who are you to tell me what to do?" He adjusted his tie and replied quietly, "You'll find out soon." Sarah rolled her eyes and waved him off. "You can wait outside. I'll report this." She turned her back, feeling victorious. She had shown him his place, or so she thought. But as the man walked away, his calm expression didn't fade. He simply whispered, "See you inside." Later that morning, Sarah entered the courtroom for her security duty. The room was filled with people waiting for their cases to be heard. She stood by the door, arms crossed, still thinking about that man. When the clerk announced the judge's name, everyone stood up. "All rise for Judge Marcus Bennett." Sarah froze. Her eyes widened as the black man from earlier entered wearing the judge's robe. Stepping up to the bench, the same man she had humiliated outside was now the one everyone was standing for. Her heartbeat quickened. She felt heat rush to her face. The room blurred for a moment as she realized what she had done. Judge Bennett looked around the courtroom calmly, his voice steady and commanding. "You may be seated." Then his eyes met hers. Sarah's stomach dropped. The calm look in his eyes was not anger but disappointment. That, somehow, felt worse. As the first case began, Sarah couldn't focus. Her pride was gone. Her confidence had melted away. All she could think about was his voice. In the moment she would have to face him again, she didn't know it yet. But that encounter at the gate would change her entire life. Because sometimes, fate has a strange sense of justice in today. It had chosen her. Officer Sarah Collins stood stiff near the courtroom door. Her mind was racing. Every word she had spoken earlier replayed in her head like a bad dream. She wanted to disappear. Judge Marcus Bennett sat at the bench, his presence calm yet powerful. The room respected him. Even the lawyers spoke softer when he looked their way. But to Sarah, his silence was louder than thunder. She felt every second stretch longer, heavier. When the first case ended, Judge Bennett's eyes lifted and stopped at her. "Officer Collins," he said firmly, "please approach the bench." The entire courtroom turned to look at her. Her throat went dry. Every step felt like walking through fire. "Yes, Your Honor," she said softly, trying to keep her voice steady. "Were you the officer on duty at the gate this morning?" he asked. She swallowed hard. Yes, sir. He nodded slowly. Do you remember what you said to me? Sarah's face burned. The memory stabbed her rude tone, her arrogance, the words that now sounded cruel. She couldn't look him in the eyes. I didn't realize who you were, she whispered. Judge Bennett leaned forward slightly. Does one's respect depend on who a person is, Officer Collins? Her lips trembled. No, Your Honor. Then why did it matter this morning? His voice wasn't loud, but it carried through the room with weight. The spectators sat silent, sensing this was more than a routine scolding. It was a lesson. Sarah blinked rapidly, her vision blurring. I was just doing my duty, sir, she said weakly. He nodded again. Doing your duty is good, but you forgot something important. What's that, sir? Humanity, he said simply. The word hit her harder than any punishment could. Judge Bennett took a slow breath and continued. Officer, I've spent my life fighting for fairness. I know how hard law enforcement can be, but when we lose our compassion, we lose the very purpose of our uniform. Sarah's hands trembled slightly. She had no answer. Do you believe in justice? He asked. Yes, Your Honor, she said quickly. Good, he replied. Then today, you'll learn what true justice means. La la la? The courtroom buzzed softly, people whispering to each other. Sarah stood frozen, unsure if this was a warning or something deeper. Judge Bennett looked down at his papers for a moment, then spoke again, his tone quieter now. Years ago, I stood on the other side of the law. I was a teenager. An officer thought I looked suspicious. Because of my skin, I was handcuffed, humiliated, and thrown into a cell. I was innocent. The courtroom went still. Even the air seemed to stop moving. Sarah's eyes lifted slowly toward him. His face remained calm, but the pain behind his words was clear. I spent one night in jail, he continued. That night changed my life. It showed me how easy it is for people in power to forget the value of kindness. I promised myself that if I ever held power, I'd use it to teach, not to destroy. Sarah's throat tightened. For the first time in her career, she felt ashamed, not because she was caught, but because she finally understood. Judge Bennett's voice softened. I'm not here to embarrass you, Officer Collins. I'm here to remind you that respect isn't given because of color, rank, or title. It's given because we all share the same dignity as human beings. A tear slipped down Sarah's cheek. She wiped it quickly, hoping no one noticed. But Judge Bennett did. He nodded slightly, a small gesture of understanding. You may step back now, he said gently. Sarah stepped away, her legs trembling. When she returned to her post, she no longer stood tall with pride. She stood quietly, her heart heavy with realization. That day, she learned something no academy ever taught her, that sometimes the people we judge are the ones meant to teach us the hardest lessons. As she looked at Judge Bennett again, she didn't see a black man in a robe. She saw a mirror showing her everything she didn't want to see, but needed to. And deep inside, she knew this was only the beginning. The courtroom returned to order, but Officer Sarah Collins couldn't calm her racing heart. Every time Judge Bennett spoke, his voice carried both wisdom and pain, like someone who had lived through storms and still learned to stand tall. After the session ended, Judge Bennett called for a short break. The audience began to leave, whispering about what had just happened. Sarah remained near the back, unsure whether to walk out or apologize. Her pride told her to stay quiet. Her heart told her to say something. As she hesitated, Judge Bennett spoke again. Officer Collins, he said without looking up, please stay for a moment. She froze. The last few people left the room, and soon it was just the two of them, the arrogant officer and the wise judge. Bennett removed his glasses and placed them on the desk. You seem uncomfortable, he said gently. Yes, Your Honor, she admitted. I didn't mean to, he raised his hand slightly. I know, you didn't mean harm. But sometimes, harm doesn't come from intention. It comes from ignorance. Those words sank deep. Sarah looked down, unable to meet his eyes. Judge Bennett leaned back in his chair, his tone soft but steady. Do you know why I asked you to stay? Sarah shook her head. No, sir. He nodded thoughtfully. Because before I decide what to do, you need to understand why I care. There was a silence. Then, in that quiet courtroom, Judge Bennett began to share a story that Sarah would never forget. Many years ago, he said, I was 17. I lived in a small town in the South. One night, I was walking home after my part-time job at a grocery store. I was tired, hungry, and just wanted to sleep. His eyes drifted as if seeing the memory again. That's when I saw flashing red and blue lights behind me. I stopped, thinking maybe someone needed help. But before I could speak, 2 police officers jumped out. They ordered me to get on the ground. Sarah's breath caught. She could imagine it, the fear, the confusion. I asked what was wrong, he continued. They said I matched the description of a suspect who had stolen a car. I had no car, no keys, nothing. Still, they searched me. One officer pushed me down and said, You people are all the same. His voice grew quiet. Those words, I'll never forget them. Not because of the insult, but because of how powerless I felt. I kept thinking if I yell, they'll hurt me. If I move, they'll shoot me. So, I stayed silent. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. She couldn't look away. They put me in a cell that night, Judge Bennett said. A cold, dirty room. I remember staring at the wall, wondering if my life meant anything. But the next morning, the real suspect was caught, a man twice my age, from another city. They let me go without an apology. He paused, looking straight at her now. That night didn't break me. It built me. It taught me what it means to feel invisible. It taught me that power, when mixed with pride, can destroy lives. Duh. Sarah's lips trembled. I didn't know, sir. Of course not, he said kindly. How could you? You didn't live it. But now you've seen what it looks like from the other side. You've seen the pain your words can cause. He stood slowly, adjusting his robe. When I became a judge, I made a promise to never use my position to punish others for their ignorance, but to open their eyes instead. That's what I'm doing today. Sarah nodded slowly, tears sliding down her cheeks. You're right, sir. I was wrong. I judged you before I even saw you. Judge Bennett gave a faint smile. It takes courage to admit that. Most people never do. He walked toward her, his steps calm and deliberate. This isn't the end of your story, Officer Collins. It's the beginning of who you might become. You can't change your past, but you can change your reflection in it. Sarah looked up, her heart heavy yet strangely lighter. What do you want me to do, sir? He looked at her with deep kindness. I want you to see the world the way I saw it that night, from the ground. Only then will you understand what real justice feels like. In that quiet moment, Sarah realized something powerful. This wasn't punishment. It was redemption in disguise, and for the first time in her life, she didn't want to win an argument. She wanted to change. The next morning felt colder than usual. Officer Sarah Collins arrived at the courthouse early, her uniform perfectly pressed, her mind heavy with everything Judge Bennett had said the day before. She hadn't slept much. His words kept echoing in her head. When power is mixed with pride, it can destroy lives. She walked inside quietly, avoiding eye contact with anyone. For the first time, her usual confidence was gone. Instead of walking tall, she walked carefully, afraid of the reflection of her own mistakes. When she entered the courtroom, Judge Bennett was already there. He looked up from his files and gave her a calm nod. Officer Collins, he said. Good morning. Good morning, Your Honor, she replied, her voice small. I've thought about our conversation, he said, taking off his glasses, and I've decided what your next duty will be. Sarah straightened, expecting a punishment, maybe suspension, or worse. But the judge's expression remained calm. You'll spend the next 30 days assigned to community duty, he said. Not at the courthouse. Not at the police station. You'll be working at the Southwood Community Center. She frowned slightly. The Southwood Center? Yes, he said. It's a neighborhood where people struggle with poverty, unemployment, and distrust toward law enforcement. You'll help them. You'll listen to them. You'll learn from them. Sarah hesitated. Sir, that area is not safe. Judge Bennett smiled faintly. Neither is a heart that refuses to change. His words hit deep. She nodded quietly. Understood, Your Honor? That afternoon, Sarah drove to Southwood. The streets looked different from the clean neighborhoods she was used to patrolling. Cracked sidewalks. Broken signs. Kids playing with worn-out basketballs. Stray dogs sleeping near old shops. As she stepped out of her car, people stared. Some looked curious, others suspicious. Her uniform, once a symbol of power, now felt like a wall between her and them. Inside the community center, a middle-aged woman greeted her warmly. You must be the officer Judge Bennett sent, she said. I'm Mrs. Harris, the director here. Sarah nodded. Yes, ma'am. Officer Collins. I'm here too. Help. Mrs. Harris smiled knowingly. Good. We always need help. But around here it's not about orders. It's about understanding. Sarah didn't fully grasp what that meant. Not yet. Her first task was simple. Help distribute food boxes. The line stretched outside the door. Families stood patiently, some with small children, others with tired eyes. When she handed the first box to an elderly man, he looked at her badge and said softly, Didn't expect someone like you to be here. His words stung, but Sarah smiled weakly. I'm just doing my duty, sir, he chuckled. Duty's a start. Heart's better. Days turned into weeks. Sarah cleaned the center, served meals, helped children with homework, and listened to stories she had never cared to hear before. One afternoon, she watched two boys fight over a broken toy. Instead of yelling, she knelt beside them and said, You both care about it, right? Then share it. The boys looked at her, surprised, then nodded. She smiled. It was the first time in years she'd solved a problem without authority, just kindness. Later, while sweeping the floor, Mrs. Harris approached her. You've changed, she said gently. Sarah looked up, confused. Have I? You used to walk like a storm, Mrs. Harris said. Now you move like the rain, calm, but still powerful. Sarah laughed softly, a real laugh this time. Maybe the judge knew what he was doing. Mrs. Harris smiled. He always does. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Sarah sat outside the center, watching the sky turn orange. For the first time in her career, she didn't feel proud of her uniform. She felt grateful for it. She understood now why Judge Bennett had sent her here. He didn't want to punish her. He wanted her to see that respect wasn't demanded, it was earned. And in the laughter of children, in the tired smiles of strangers, she found something she had lost long ago, her heart. That night, as she drove home, Sarah whispered to herself, Justice isn't about power. It's about people. She didn't know it yet. But her journey of transformation had only just begun, and the test Judge Bennett had given her was working perfectly. Weeks passed, and the Southwood Community Center had slowly become part of Officer Sarah Collins' daily life. The once proud and distant officer was no longer the same. Every morning she arrived early, sometimes even before the doors opened. She greeted people with a smile, carried heavy boxers, and listened to their stories with genuine interest. At first, people still looked at her with suspicion. Some ignored her completely. Others whispered, She's just here because of the judge. But Sarah didn't argue. She didn't defend herself. She simply kept working, day after day. And something unexpected began to happen. The people started to trust her. One afternoon, while helping a group of children with their art project, a little girl named Maya handed her a small drawing. It was a picture of Sarah, drawn in a police uniform, standing beside the children with a smile. On the top of the paper, Maya had written in shaky handwriting, Nice police lady. For a moment, she couldn't speak. She had spent years being called tough, strict, and rude. No one had ever called her nice. Thank you, Maya, she said softly. The girl grinned. You don't shout like the other officers. Sarah laughed a little. I used to, she admitted, but I'm learning not to. That night, as she sat alone in her small apartment, Sarah placed the drawing on her table and stared at it. For the first time, she didn't see a uniform. She saw a person. A person she was slowly learning to become. The next day, while handing out meals at the center, she noticed an old woman struggling to cross the street outside. Without thinking, Sarah dropped everything and ran to help her. The woman leaned on her arm, smiling. "Thank you, dear," the old woman said kindly. "You remind me of Judge Bennett." Sarah blinked in surprise. "You know him?" "Oh yes," the woman nodded. "Years ago, he helped save this community. When no one else cared, he came here. He fought for better schools, cleaner streets, and respect for our people." Sarah smiled softly. "That sounds like him." The woman squeezed her hand. "He believes people can change, even when they think they can't." Those words settled in Sarah's heart like a warm light. She finally understood this was what Judge Bennett had wanted her to see. The power of compassion. The strength of humility. Later that week, Mrs. Harris, the community center director, called Sarah into her office. "You've done well here, Officer Collins," she said, smiling. "The people talk about you differently now." Sarah blushed slightly. "I just try to help." Mrs. Harris nodded. "That's what helping really is, trying. You'd be surprised how many people forget that." As Sarah left the office, she saw two teenagers arguing outside the building. Their voices were loud, angry. Without hesitation, she stepped in. "Hey," she said calmly. "What's going on?" One boy glared. "He took my jacket." "I didn't. It was just lying there." The other shouted. Instead of yelling, Sarah sat down on the steps between them. "You both look tired," she said softly. "You know what's funny? A jacket can be replaced. A friendship can't." The boys looked at her, confused but listening. After a moment, one of them sighed. "Sorry," he muttered. The other nodded. "Yeah, me too." Sarah smiled. "Good. Now let's get some food before it's all gone." As they walked inside, Mrs. Harris watched from the door, smiling proudly. The once cold officer had learned to use her words not as weapons, but as healing. That evening, Sarah drove back to the courthouse. She had completed her community assignment, but she didn't want it to end. She wanted to thank Judge Bennett when she entered his office. He looked up, surprised. "Officer Collins," he said warmly, "you've done well." Sarah handed him the child's drawing, the one that said "Nice Police Lady." He looked at it for a long moment, then smiled. "I see change, not just in the drawing, but in your heart?" Sarah nodded, her eyes glistening. "You were right, sir. Justice isn't about power. It's about people." Judge Bennett stood and extended his hand. "Then you've learned the real meaning of the badge you wear," as she shook his hand. Sarah realized her journey from arrogance to understanding was complete, but in truth it wasn't the end. It was the beautiful beginning of who she was always meant to be. The morning of the ceremony was bright and full of life. The courthouse that once felt cold and intimidating now glowed with warmth. Banners hung from the walls, reading, honoring justice and humanity. Judges, officers, and community members filled the hall. Judge Marcus Bennett was being honored for his years of service, for his wisdom, fairness, and compassion that had changed countless lives. Officer Sarah Collins stood quietly among the crowd. She wore her uniform with pride, but this time, the pride came from a different place. It wasn't about rank or authority. It was about meaning. Her eyes searched the room until they found him, Judge Bennett, standing near the podium, smiling humbly as people shook his hand. When he noticed her, he gave a small nod, and she felt her heart swell with gratitude. The ceremony began with speeches from city officials, praising the judge for his long years of justice. They spoke about his awards, his reputation, his achievements. But when it was time for Judge Bennett to speak, he didn't talk about any of that. He stepped up to the microphone, holding a small piece of paper, then paused. His deep, calm voice filled the hall. "Thank you all," he began, "for this honor. But today I don't want to speak about the law. I want to speak about what makes the law alive, the human heart behind it." The audience grew silent. He continued, "I've seen many cases, many faces, and many mistakes. Some of them were mine. But what I've learned is this: justice without compassion is just punishment. True justice is when change happens inside the heart. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. His words echoed the lesson she had learned, the one that had transformed her life. Judge Bennett smiled faintly. "A few weeks ago," he said, "I had an experience that reminded me why I became a judge. An officer disrespected me outside this very courthouse. She didn't know who I was, and in her pride, she forgot her humanity." The crowd stirred. Sarah lowered her gaze, her face burning. But the judge wasn't finished. He smiled gently. "I could have punished her. I could have reported her, suspended her, or even humiliated her in return. But I saw something, a spark, buried deep, waiting for understanding. So instead of giving her punishment, I gave her a lesson." He looked straight at Sarah now, and she took that lesson to heart. Its murmur spread through the room. People turned to look at her. Sarah felt exposed, but she also felt proud. This was her truth. Judge Bennett continued. "That same officer went on to serve the Southwood community, not because she had to, but because she chose to. She found kindness where she once saw weakness. She found humanity where she once saw color. And she taught me something too, that even the hardest hearts can change if given a chance."
Ow.
The hall was completely silent. Some people were wiping tears. Others nodded with deep respect. Judge Bennett placed his paper aside. "That is the kind of justice I believe in," he said softly. "The kind that heals instead of hurts. The kind that listens before judging. The kind that sees beyond the uniform, beyond the skin, beyond the pride to the person inside." He turned toward Sarah and said, "Officer Collins, please stand." Her heart pounded as she rose. "Everyone," he said, "this officer is proof that change is possible. We are all capable of falling, but it's how we rise that defines us." The audience erupted into applause. Sarah's eyes filled with tears as she stood tall, not out of pride but humility. Judge Bennett smiled. "You once said to me, 'I didn't know who you were. Now I hope you know who you are.'" Sarah's voice trembled as she replied, "Yes, sir. I do." The applause grew louder, echoing through the hall. For the first time, Sarah felt what true honor meant, not from medals, not from power, but from redemption. As the ceremony ended, Judge Bennett walked over and shook her hand. "Keep serving with your heart, Officer Collins," he said. She nodded, smiling through tears. "Thank you, Your Honor, for everything." As she stepped outside, sunlight warmed her face. The city looked brighter, the world kinder, and deep inside, she knew she wasn't just an officer anymore. She was a protector of people, and a student of humanity, and that was the verdict that changed everything.